Hello, everyone. Apologies for the delay. Secretary General Gurria was delighted with the conversation and the coffee, and I had to virtually pull her out. And fortunately, here we are. Well, thank you all for coming to. This is the 17th session of the Coffees of the Secretary General. I think this is already traction. We are celebrating this 17th occasion with Malene. As you know, the purpose of these Coffees of the Secretary General is to bring to the OECD people that are working on relevant issues for the organization from another trench, from another chemistry, from another point of view that can help us enrich the view of the Secretary General and the staff of the OECD to refine our sensitivity, to perhaps also contrast our beliefs. But definitely it's a learning experience, and I encourage you in the Q&A to debate. I promise I wouldn't say that, but yeah, I think it can be a great discussion. I'm happy to welcome Malene Rydahl. I cannot pronounce her surname in Danish, so I'll say it in English. She's a writer, an entrepreneur, a TED talker, I call her. She's Goodwill Ambassador and member of the Advisory Committee of the Positive Economy Forum. Malene is the author of the very interesting book, Heureux comme un Danois, which won the prize of the most optimistic book here in France, which is it's amazing. No? I think it's a paradox. I love France, but optimism is something that I keep looking for. Don't quote me on that. Malene will share with us her experience in writing her book, but also in promoting and debating the ideas of the book throughout the world. She just came back from Asia, where she was also, the book was translated, as far as I understand, in Japan, Korea, and Taiwan.
Coming out of Russia and Turkey.
Russia and Turkey. Coming soon in Russia and Turkey. And she will also, I hope, share some insights of the new project that she's working on, which is more focused on the illusions of happiness, which tempts me to pose a question, is happiness an illusion itself? But I'm sure her presentation will prove me wrong. So before I pass the floor to Malene, I want to share with you our flying schedule. Ambassador Holm, who I thank very much for the support, who has had a very interesting lunch with us as well, will give a few words. Then Malene will speak for about 25 minutes, and then we'll have 30 minutes of Q&A. So without further ado, Ambassador, I pass you the floor.
Thank you, Mario. And I would like to, of course, also welcome Malene Rydahl, which is actually the pronunciation.
Thank you, Carlos.
And also thank you for the ambassadors who are here, who have come here today. Now, in 2009, Oprah Winfrey went to Copenhagen to study this phenomenon of happy people. And she was quite amazed because she met this student of architecture and was invited home to her two-piece apartment and her refrigerator, which was about this high. So she asked, where are you keeping the other things? Where do you have your other fridge? And she couldn't believe anything she saw during that trip. In 2007, we established a department for public diplomacy in Copenhagen because we thought that a little bit of work was needed in order to do some nation branding of Denmark after the Mohammed cartoons issue, to be frank. And then we reflect a little bit on what are the issues or the values, the branding values that we would use in this campaign. And first thing that came to our mind was, of course, the usual ones, like Copenhagen itself, the Tivoli Gardens, the Royals, Hamlet, the Vikings, and all that. But very soon we found out that it didn't really have any impact on a foreign audience, except for the tourists who wanted to come and see the castle of Hamlet and so on. So we started to look at sort of more profound values like the welfare system, the flexicurity, the green agenda, all these people bicycling and so on, and we felt that this actually caught some attraction in foreign publics. So then in 2009, this happy people thing arrived, and that was good for us because then we got this whole framework, the all-encompassing narrative for the happy people, and that was absolutely a good thing. And from then on, we could actually draw on the happy people. So it looks as though there are quite a few happy people here tonight. Perhaps you should have a happy-o-meter down there at the entrance to see whether people are happy enough to attend. But you know, all this thing about nation branding is also a competition between nation states, and we always compete with the Swedes. I don't know how many Swedes are here. But what I used to say that of course we have all the best thing in our country, but there's one thing that the Swedes have that we do not have, and that's good neighbors. So I can't. With that, I couldn't resist the temptation for vis-a-vis the Swedes. So anyway, we are thrilled to listen to what you had to say about this thing about the happy people, and thank you again for coming, Malene.
Thank you, Klaus.
Thank you very much. It's I'm actually extremely happy, and I know it's the topic of the day or the session, to be here today. But to be honest, and I want to tell you this little story, when Mary Lopez called me in for a meeting at the OECD to suggest this conference, I actually said no. And I said no based on the assumption that surely the experts at OECD would know more about my topic than I do. And Mary looked at me and he said, I believe that you write about trust in your book, don't you? I said, that's correct. And he said, well, I'm asking you right now to trust me because I actually invented this concept. And I know that you have great things to say. And I know that you use a lot of our numbers in your book. You say a lot of the same things as we do, but you say them in a very different way. And you talk to different people. And we're interested in that. So I said yes, and that's why I'm here today. And it's, of course, a big day for me and a great honor. But last Wednesday was an equally big day for me because I met up with a teacher from a apprenticeship school in Saint Louis, down near Mulhouse, who had written me a letter about 2 months ago saying that he had read my book and he had decided that he was going to teach my book in his school to a group of children who basically don't like reading books. And he hopped on the train to Paris and he came to see me last Wednesday. And he had tons of questions to ask me about the Danish model, and I, of course, had tons of questions to ask him about why do the children want to read my book if they don't want to read books. He said, because you deliver it in a different way, coming back to what Mario had said, which makes me very proud. But he also ended the session by asking that $1 million question that people always ask me. Are you happy? Of course they would ask me that question. I wrote a book about happiness. I come from one of the happiest countries in the world. It's an obvious question to ask. And my answer was the same as it is every time. Of course, absolutely happy some of the time. In my case, actually, most of the time, but definitely not all of the time. And I think what is important here is that a country cannot give you a happiness model that makes you happy all the time. It's, of course, an illusion. We're not happy all the time. A country can, in the best case scenario, give you a good base of well-being that you can build on. Of course, we have bad days. We even have bad periods. And to that respect, countries also have bad days, and they also have bad periods. And even though you're noted as one of the happiest countries in the world on these lists, and you do well in certain areas, you cannot ask of a country to be perfect, and there will be periods, and there will be decisions, and there will be things that you would say, that doesn't fit in with that model. But that's, unfortunately, the truth of it, is that, of course, you cannot expect, nor for a person, nor for a country, to be happy. But I'm gonna, and see now, you didn't get that great sentence. The dangerous illusion of the permanent happiness, because I do think it's dangerous, and I do think that the media and that we're all a little bit responsible, and me the first, to actually make this into a concept as something we should accomplish and that should stay there once we get there, which is not realistic. But what I'm going to try to do today is to talk to you about some of the main reasons of why actually the Danish society works, and it seems to have people expressing that they're satisfied in life, that they have a good base of well-being repeatedly for 40 years. And to try and seduce you a little bit, I'm going to take you on a little visual journey into my country. This is basically what it looks like when you wake up in the morning, the weather. And once you get ready for work, this is how you get there. 50% of the population go to work on their bicycles. Once you're done with working, this is how much you pay in income tax. And if you're thinking, it can't all be about work and about paying taxes, let me take you to a day at the beach. And if I haven't convinced you with that, then you're thinking maybe you got to have friends as well. That's important, right, in happiness? This is probably what your neighbor will look like, because in Denmark, there are more pigs than people. And you're probably thinking, oh, good luck convincing us now. But I'm going to try, and I'm going to talk to you about three things. I'm going to talk to you about trust. I'm going to talk to you about the freedom to be you. And I'm going to talk to you about individual responsibility for the common project. Now, trust. Denmark has actually the highest level of trust in the world. It's at 78%, according to Danish professor Tinggaard Svendsen, who wrote a book only on trust. And to give you a point of reference, trust would be measured in France, for instance, at 22%, in many African countries at 5%. And this gives the Danes a very solid base of peace of mind. And what does that look like in a society? Well, basically, you would see in Denmark babies sleeping outside restaurants in strollers. And people would think, not being part of the Danish society, but nobody's watching the babies. And that's when I would say, well, everyone is actually watching the babies. And this goes as well when you go to the opera. You would put your belongings in a wardrobe that is not supervised. Or when you go to the countryside and you find little booths and stands with vegetable fruits and you have money, you put them in a little pot and you take out your change. So how does that work? Is this something that can actually be exported? Why is trust high in Denmark, and why can't they get societies of trust in other parts of the world? Well, I would say that trust actually starts with the population and with ourselves choosing to be trustworthy people. Because creating communities of trust, even starting with a small community of 5 people, 10 people, 100 people, or even following the example of Muhammad Yunus, the Nobel Prize winner, who created Grameen's Bank in Bangladesh, a country with 5% trust. He gave loans to thousands of people, and 95% of them were paid back. I think with this example in mind, it should be an inspiration to all of us of the individual responsibility that we actually hold in changing the society and actually being or acting the part of the society that we would like to be in. And I think it's part of the strength of what we're seeing is Denmark, that trust actually increases trust. And it's the best explanation I can give to you, because you see other people acting this way. And this is why you replicate, and this is why you do. And I like to emphasize the point by saying that I don't live in Denmark. I've actually been living in France for the past 20 years. So I come from a country with almost 80% trust, and I live in a country with 22%. And yet my environment of trust in France, I would say that it's around 80%. because it's a choice that we make every day of how we behave towards other people. And I think this is one of the things that you can take away from the Danish model. And if you look at what governments can do, well, governments can start by fighting corruption, of course. And to that point, Denmark also comes up as the least corrupt country in the world, according to international transparency, and has been for a number of years. And I like to tell the story of our last corruption, because even in a least or with little corruption, you of course have corruption cases or crises in a country. And we had a couple of months ago our prime minister who had actually forgotten to put some bills for some clothing on his tax declaration. And this was a bit of a crisis. You know, he shouldn't have done that. He should have declared those bills of those suits that he was wearing for public events. But where the real crisis broke out, you probably remember this, was when the media found out that he had put underwear on the bill. Because they were saying, you know, we might pay for his suits, he should declare them, but who's going to watch his underwear? So you see, it's never those big cases that we see. But I'm going to talk to you about the second point now. I'm going to talk to you about the freedom to be you. So what do I mean by that? I mean that how free are we really to choose our lives, even in democracies in the Western world where we feel pretty free? I call it more, in an image, the freedom of the buffet, that you feel you make a choice, but actually in reality it's been pre-selected for you. One of the reasons why, or several of the reasons why, the Danes are more free to choose their lives is mainly because of our educational system. Because the main purpose of the Danish educational system is actually to develop the personality of the child. We do not rate materials at school higher, whether it's math, languages, if you're manually good, mechanically good, sports, because we want the children to understand that no matter what role they choose in society, it's important to society. Because when you go out in life and you have this base and you feel that no matter what your talent is, it's important to society, you actually have an extraordinary base to choose a life that corresponds to who you are. And the other side of it is that most Danish people, actually more than 70% of the Danish people, leave home when they're 18 years old. And the fact that they leave home when they're 18 years old and that they have a student grant that's given to every young person in the country makes them able to make their own choices. The parents cannot project their own ambitions on their children. And I know that all parents would always argue that they're trying to do the best, but when the children are completely free at the age of 18 to say, well, this is my passion, this is what I want to do, it gives you a better chance of actually ending up living your life and not a life. About two-thirds of Danish children also work from the age of 13 because they're taught at an early age a little bit of independence. You make a little bit of money, it's only maybe a couple of hours, but you have your pocket money. And it's also an individual responsibility. You open up your bank account and you start, as a very young citizen, getting this sense of responsibility and what it means. I'm going to talk to you about a different expression of freedom to choose who you want to be in the Danish society. I'm going to talk to you about gender equality. Denmark has very good numbers on gender equality. It was just voted the best country in the world for women to live in. I can tell you about 37%, more than 37% of women in the parliament in Denmark. I can tell you that there's only a 5% difference between men and women on the workforce in Denmark. So we're doing pretty well. But the real difference that I see is that Denmark has done something that I think is the key to the further development of this question, is that they liberated the man. And now most people would think that the man, he's always been free. has he really been free? Has he not been stuck a little bit in the same role for many years? Is he really free all over the world to choose to be a father that's present, that leaves early to pick up his children? Is he really free to say, I just had a baby, I want to take care of it? Or is he really free to be less ambitious and not be laughed at? And I think if you think about the model, if you liberate the woman, and the model is that she's free now to be like the man, if you only steer it in one direction, the model falls. So in order to get a certain equality, and actually for the women not to be super women, and actually free them to choose the role of the man, but still do all the parts of the job as a woman usually do, the model actually falls a little bit. And I think it's an interesting thing that's happened in Denmark. I want to talk to you about the individual responsibility as the last point. The individual responsibility for the common project. A few years ago, a major crisis broke out again in Denmark. A man called Robert did an interview in the media, and he said, you know what, I'm unemployed, but I think that's okay. I don't want to go and work in some fast food restaurant, boring job. I'm unemployed. Some people got to be unemployed, so I'm not going to look for a job. Well, I'll tell you what, the biggest crisis broke out in the country, kingdom of Denmark, because that's not okay. It is not okay not to feel individually responsible for the common project. That is just not okay. And so the poor guy was named Lazy Robert for many years after. But it's a story that tells the whole responsibility in a nutshell, because you cannot have that attitude. And this is also why 7 out of 10 Danes actually express being happy paying taxes, and we have the heaviest taxes in the world. It makes sense to be part of the common project being the welfare state. And the welfare state is actually one of the things that the Danes express being the most proud of. Participating in a society where people have equal rights, equal opportunities, they get medical care, and it creates a base, again, of well-being for these people. So why do we care about the Danes when we don't live in Denmark and when we're not Danish? Simply because my whole conclusion of this issue is that these are, of course, not Danish values. They're human values. I don't even live in Denmark. I was raised with these values, and I exported them to France. And I still live by the same values. I like paying taxes here. And when it comes to trust, again, I'm going to go back to choosing to be that person and to actually creating that kind of environment, no matter where you live in the world. And even when it comes to, many people would argue, but the school system is not like this in the country I come from. Maybe not, but you're still free to send your children to a Steiner school. You're still free to not judge other people when they try to make free choices of choosing their own lives. When people try to break out of the system that's called the traditional system, that are the norms of society, this is a freedom that all of us have every day, not to judge, but actually to encourage and support other people's choices of choosing their life. Because it's easy, around a table, head that sticks out. Shouldn't do that, that's strange, that's weird. But we can all choose to have that role, and that's not Danish. It's just human. In terms of individual responsibility, that's actually that whole main point, because our individual responsibility as citizens, not only of a country but of the world, is exactly that. It is the role that we choose to incarnate and be every day in society. Are you a trustworthy person? Well, then you're part of that change. Do you leave other people free to choose their lives? Because if we wait for politicians or for presidents or for anybody else to change the system for us, I think we're going to wait for a long time. And the change is actually going to come, in my view, from the societies that we create or the communities that we create from bottom up. Inspire other people to see things a different way, to not be victims of the system, but to be part of it. Because if you feel you're a victim of a system, you're passive. Can't do anything about it. If you're part of the system, you have a role, and you become maybe part of a bigger project. When I did my book tour in Asia, I did a conference at the book fair in Seoul. And many of the Koreans were fascinated with the Danish model, and they still are. And actually in Korea, they're about to open up the first concept of what we call a post-school. A post-school is an efterskole. It's a concept that was invented in Denmark. There's around 150 of those schools. They're catered to young children around the age of 14, 15, 16 years old. A little lost, not sure what they want to do. And they're specialized in all kinds of creativity or materials or ideas of what you could do in your life. Mechanical school, dancing, culture, painting. Basically building up young people so that they become proud of doing what they do and understanding that they have value in society. And on this big book tour with this whole fascination of the Danish model, after my conference, a young Korean man got up and he said, "Thank you. I read your book and I loved it, and actually I live by these values. This is what I fight for. I get up in the morning and I fight to change our society, to have more trust, to have more freedom to be ourselves and not feel so compressed and obliged to do whatever our parents expect and what society expects of us, and to feel more engaged in a common project." And he said, "But I feel very alone. I'm swinging against the current." I said, "Well, I can see that, but I'm sure that you know why you get up in the morning and that you have purpose in your life." And this is actually maybe one of the key findings that we have found around this whole happiness topic, is that if you have meaning in your life, if you have purpose, if you feel that you're part of a greater project, it becomes a very good base to create a happy life. Should we open up for questions?
Okay. Thank you, Malene. We also have a microphone in case someone wants to ask a question from the back benches. I come from a country with a lot of problems. You know, Mexican, and we have great challenges in terms of insecurity, poverty, inequality. Most of the people certainly are not free to send their children to the school they want to send them. But still, in our house life, Mexico is above Denmark in life satisfaction. So I'm a bit confused, that I must admit. I have many questions, and I'm not going to ask them now. I'm going to let you ask the questions. I'll ask them later. But that's just to throw and to kick off the Q&A session. Anyone brave enough to start? We have many people. I'm sure there are going to be many questions. Here in the back. Thank you, Costas.
Thank you. California, I don't know how far it measures compared to Denmark, but that's where I originally come from. This is a topic discussed a lot in that part of the world, and I'm just wondering, have you found any links to innovation, looking at happiness and...
I think what we have found is that, especially in the educational system, the more people are free to actually express their creativity and their innovation, the more they create, and the more you see. This has also been a big subject in organizations, actually in corporations now. They're looking at the well-being and the happiness of employees for the simple reason that productivity actually increases, and so does creativity and innovation in corporations. So in that aspect, it's been studied in terms of in companies and corporations.
Thank you. Ambassador.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the presentation. I come from a country which is one of the most unhappiest and one of the most pessimistic in Hungary. But my question is related rather not just to Hungary, rather to Central and Eastern Europe. So in my country, or in Eastern and Central Europe, you know historical reason why. But the happiness is taught as a kind of mobility, upward mobility. It's for the whole countries. When could we reach the level of Western countries? And also in personal life, which is a social mobility and the catching up. So, and when we can't achieve it, we are unhappy. Yeah? That's, so my question is, in that case, what do you think when countries doesn't reach a certain level of well-being and so on, or also in material sense, when they have this huge pressure, how can they be happy, more happy than now?
Well, I think generally speaking that there is a big difference between, and I use this word as well, between actually individual sort of happiness and what it's based on. And when you look at the collective well-being of a country, of course, the more you believe that that wealth will lead to more happiness, and people run for that and they believe in it. And actually, that's not what studies have shown. The longest study on happiness that has been made by Harvard for 75 years on 273 men shows that the one thing that matters is the quality of your relationships. And this is, of course, a fascinating study because it's made on a great number of people from different social backgrounds, but it's also been made over such a long period of time. So we have perspective on what they say. And I think the second answer, I'm going to go back to having meaning and purpose in life. And this can mainly come from the educational system, what we teach our children, because... And Mary is right to mention this. If you take an example like Mexico on the World Happiness Report is number 15. Mexico has huge corruption, and there is more than 50% of the population that are poor. So I guess some of it is genetic, and that's what they say, the scientifics, that 50% of your potential of happiness is genetic, 10% is what actually happens to you, and 40% is what you do with it. I don't know if it answers exactly your question, but this is my best answer.
Another question down back, if we can share them.
So this is, and thank you for asking that question because it's very interesting. And Denmark, as actually all of the other countries that are on the top 10 list of the happiest countries in the world, or on the highest consumers of antidepressives. Now, how can that make sense?
Well, it makes sense.
Now, let's just establish one thing, is that if you have ever taken or known anybody who has taken antidepressive medicine, you of course realize that it doesn't make you happy, it makes you neutral. The second thing is that one of the reasons why these countries come up high on the list is that we're actually free to say when we're not okay. There are 350 million people today in the world suffering from depression. Only 25% of them are treated. Probably in the countries on the happiest nations where we're more free to say, I'm not okay, getting divorced, got fired, lost somebody, need a period of a little bit of support, I go in and I go out. Probably close to 100% of people in Denmark that have problems would do that. If you take other countries, you could take Portugal or Spain or Brazil, I'm not sure that people are that free to say, I'm not okay publicly go to see a doctor and get medicine. It's a taboo, and it's not in Denmark. So the numbers get high, and I also think, to be honest, that they're a little biased numbers, because in certain troubled areas of the world, you actually don't have access to antidepressives, so it's not the question that you're asking because it's not relevant. So we have to be a little bit relative with the results.
Thank you. Ambassador.
Thank you very much. I'm from Japan. My question to you is just two things. I think first is, if you could kindly put the history of Danish people into perspective, when it started, or from the very beginning, from the days of Viking period, or when it happened. I'm so curious to know if you can. Second thing is, we all know, like famous philosopher like Schopenhauer. I think he remarked that human nature is comprised of really, in essence, through three elements only: self-love, self-interest. Number two, maliciousness, or Schadenfreude, enjoy your neighbors and our happiness. And the third is, of course, altruism, maybe agape type of love, altruistic love. And it seems to me that what I just heard to what you said about Danes means you don't really have any maliciousness at all, or simply you don't, since people are so egalitarian, so you don't really worry about kind of widening income gaps or whatever kind of gap. So you don't have to feel any kind of sense of inferiority, complex, or whatever. Or also, people are more, well, in a way, to enjoy a good mix of a self-love and altruism, attention to empathy or sympathy to your neighbors, your citizens, and in the name. And then my final point, simply, can you but imagine? Well, this is not just my question. Another question is size of nation. I know, Danish country is how many population? 5 million, 6 million? Yeah. So, nothing to discount the Danish model, the strength, and I think it's shining kind of attractiveness. I do wonder, but is it really feasible for us to replicate it into a bigger population, country of bigger population, maybe 100 million, like my country, 120 million. Rather, we Zen teaching always try to teach us, no, not like maybe, forget about growth, no. Forget about gaps, but be content with what you have. But that seems to be suggest very stationary and society. And I don't find it really attractive. So, but anyway, your message is very, very stimulating. So sorry, I asked maybe too many questions, but whatever, if you could answer. Yeah.
Said I don't have a pen, so I'm going to do my best to answer all of your questions. To answer your first question, we don't know exactly where it comes from, but the trust, they say that from the Vikings, that actually back in that time, when they were doing trade, there were no papers and there were no contracts. So everything was done on a handshake. Maybe people were a little bit scared of getting their heads cut off, but they say that traditionally from year 1000 that the Vikings were the first ones to install this sort of relationship that you actually can trust people on their word. And for the rest of it, I would say it's gradually been developed that way in society, and it's something that's carried on with generations, again, because I think people see other people act this way. My book is published in Japan, and I went to visit your country, and I actually think that your country is one of the most civilized countries in the world. And I understand why you would make those observations about is there nothing malicious in Denmark, and I would argue that there is. Of course there is, and I draw out the positive perspectives, or my book is a little bit nuanced. I also talk about some of the dark sides, but for this purpose of this exercise, I of course bring out the reasons why it's a good well-being model. can the size of the country be the determinant factor? If you look at the World Happiness Report and you take the first third, the middle third, and the last third, there's nothing that really points to the fact that the size of countries matters if you pull it up in thirds. Now, in the top 10, the biggest country is Canada. It's 35 million people. And the biggest country on the top of the list is Mexico, number 15. And then it's United States at number 16, 340 million. And pardon me because I can't remember if we take this list as a reference exactly what number Japan is, but I do think that there are certain things you can do, and I don't necessarily agree that Denmark has a very liberal economy. We have a welfare system, and this was also discussed by our prime minister, and this was stated in the American media because it was mentioned by Bernie Sanders as the reference of the perfect social model and he said, well, we actually have a very liberal economy. So maybe we don't have time today to go into those details, but if you look at the way the Danish economy is set up, it's not only about being, I think we don't waste a lot of time on distrusting each other. That's good. And I think we liberate a lot of people, and that people are more engaged in what they do in society because they're actually free and they don't feel compressed, and that they feel maybe more content in life. And this creates a certain level of productivity. And so by having and giving people this space of actually choosing their lives and being free, if you sit in a meeting and you're scared to say anything because of your hierarchy, because your boss is there, then you're not. Maybe you're very happy, you have all this information, all this passion you want to get out. Maybe that can be a problem. But as far as, did I get all the questions? Did you note down, Mary?
Well, I think in general terms, yes.
Yes.
One more question there. Yeah.
Sorry, to what extent do you think that high levels of trust and this notion of contributing to a greater good... Shall I start again? To what extent do you think that high levels of trust and this notion of contributing to a greater good are dependent on homogeneity in a society? Or in other words, is it easy for a very mixed society, culturally, economically, socially, to be happy? And I think the question is particularly interesting because of the very large population movements we're seeing across the world currently, and of course some countries' responses to that have been interesting.
The refugee crisis is, I suppose that's what you're referring to, is a world issue, and unfortunately countries around the globe have closed their borders and are not willing to help in this situation. Some countries are helping. In the case of Denmark and in the case of many other European countries, some of the political decisions have been surprising to many of us, also to many of the Danes. Denmark is it's the second country in Europe that takes the most refugees per habitat. And it is one of the 5 countries in the world that actually meet the international aid numbers. So they do a lot. And I think because of that, it is more surprising / disappointing how the response has been handled. I don't think necessarily we want to get into the debate of the nature of the whole discussion around the jewels, but what I can establish is that the law that has been voted on that note is actually a Danish law that applies to Danish people living in the country. So if you ask for any financial help in the country, you're not allowed to have more than 1,300 euros on your account. So that you can consider that to be fair or unfair, but it is actually what applies as a rule in our country for Danish people that live there. And the rest of the details, I think it's for another discussion because it's a long discussion.
Okay, we're getting close to the end. Perhaps one final question. Okay, well, if they're quick, we can take both.
Hi, I was wondering, you've talked a lot about the freedom for children to choose their own path and the freedom for adults to be liberated. But I was wondering what happens when you look at senior citizens, because in cultures, in Asian cultures or Oriental cultures, you have a lot of family dynamics where the entire family looks after each other, and children, grandchildren look after their aging parents and provide for them. And in a world where you free everybody up and you give them more individual power, they might not have that same incentive to look after their parents while them in nursing homes. They may end up more lonely. And I guess, related to that, do you think that personal relationships suffer then in Denmark, and does that change the level of happiness that you observe?
It's an interesting question, and I think it's, and I definitely see why you asked the question. I think in terms of relationships and love, if you love your children and you give them the support to choose to be who they want to be, and they become happy adults, they'll take care of you. So do you want to create a dependent system, or do you want to create a free love system? And I actually think I've been very independent from my parents. I left when I was 18. I paid my first rent at home when I was 18. And then I left. But I took care of my parents because I love them and because they took care of me. They took care of me in the sense that they gave me love, they gave me freedom to choose my life, and they supported all of my life choices, no matter what they were. Leaving the country, working in restaurants and bars for 2 years before I picked up my studies again. They supported all of that. They believed in me. And because they did that, I give them back, and I love them back, but I'm not dependent on them. And I don't do it because I have to. I do it because I want to. And that's my answer.
Thank you, Malene. We have the last question over there.
Yes, just a quick one. You talked a lot, and it was very interesting, and thank you for having visited us, and it's obvious that it's relevant to a lot of the work that we are undertaking. But you talked a lot about trust in the others, really the importance how relationships matter in being happy, trust in oneself. Perhaps you talked less about trust in the future, trust in the power of change, and you've written a book about how Danes are happy. I mean, my standpoint is France. Why are French unhappy? That could be another book, and it seems to me that it's very much related to this issue, trust in the power of change in the future. So could you perhaps address this dimension as well?
I addressed this issue in the book as well, and it is one of the things, or one of the numbers that show, when you look at the studies, that the young Danish people actually feel very free to choose their lives. I don't have all of the numbers in my head right now, but I think it's more than 60% of young Danes saying, I'm free to choose the life that I want to lead, which is a very high number, because it means that you basically believe in the future and you believe that you can create the life that you want to lead. And of course, having optimism, thinking that you can do things, thinking that you can create a life that's a good life, and that I think the fact that we have equal opportunities, that when you're a son of a carpenter, you're as likely to become a lawyer as the son of a lawyer. And that as a base, when you grow up, is very fair, and it makes you believe in the system, because there is an element where it's up to you. I mean, you can come from a heavily charged social environment, which for other reasons makes it difficult for you to concentrate on studies or other elements. So I'm not saying again that the system is perfect, but I think that because you know that there are equal opportunities, you can go and study whatever you want to if you have the abilities. I mean, if you study, and that makes you believe in the future, and that Denmark actually has one of the highest numbers of young people believing in the fact that they can choose their lives.
Thank you, Malene. Thank you, everyone. Let me conclude with one quote. As you know, I write speeches, so I love quotes, by Booker T. Washington, which I love, that says, "Those who are happiest are those who do the most for others." And if that is true, I think in the OECD we must be very, very happy because we do a lot for many people. I want to thank Malene for this wonderful presentation, for this excellent debate. Thank all of you for your enthusiasm, and maybe we should give her a big round of applause. Thank you, and see you in the next session, everyone.